not all stations, or even the planets of the post-war Federation, especially those that weren't of much interest to the military or the federal government, could maintain order, even as relative as the Backwater Station. But when you went outside the Federation, into the motley kaleidoscope of free settlements that, even before the war, had not been a very safe place for the casual tourist, you definitely had to keep your eyes open. Klaus, however, was anything but a casual tourist. For this journey, he'd taken from Backwater a ship that had been supposedly non-existent for a dozen years, first demilitarized, that is, stripped of all weapons, and then decommissioned and sent for recycling at the New Hope shipyards. None of this was true, and if Klaus had been intercepted by a military patrol, it would have been tough for him to explain what he was doing on a fully armed, even with modified torpedoes and mass driver guns, Manticore Raider 30 years after the end of hostilities. However, military patrols were rarely, if ever, seen in the places Klaus was headed. There was still the possibility of encountering another, far more dangerous force. A small one, of course, but it couldn't be dismissed out of hand. Self-guided minefields and automatic interceptor stations, even decades old, could not be discounted. When the moderate faction in the Ullerian conglomerate finally came to power and decided to put an end to the war with the Earth Federation, which the conglomerate was already hopelessly losing, some star systems were already so mangled and devastated by the war that neither the humans, nor their allies, nor the completely exsanguinated conglomerate wanted to clean them up and rebuild them. It was here that those for whom unnecessary attention could be dangerous could hide from such attention. It meant attention from both the victorious and defeated sides of the war. The problem was that the hidden ones weren't exactly welcoming uninvited guests, and they didn't issue invitations to anyone. Of course, Klaus had sent an encrypted hypergram to an unregistered relay station in the Chang'at system, but it was not certain it had reached its destination. It could have fallen into the hands of other humans, or non-humans. However, against his expectations and fears, Klaus reached his destination almost without incident, except for a half-hour game of catch-up with a missile mine. He finally managed to blast it away with a mass driver, and a forced flight through the atmosphere of a gas giant, the sixth planet in the system, to avoid detection by the suspiciously intact automated orbital fort, which was not in any of the old military or new clandestine logs. He managed to make it through the rest without further obstacles. 3 more hours later, he was already mooring his raider at the docking ramp of Isog station. The word Isog in Ullerian meant greatness, but the irony was that this greatness, strictly speaking, had very little to do with the conglomerate. The hop-up station for mid-range raiders had once been built by humans, but along with the system, it had been captured early in the war and customized by the Ullerians to suit their needs. The sector where the Chang'at system was located was devastated by the war. Some of the planets had been nuked, and eventually, those who had survived the occupation and the fighting had fled, leaving the system a graveyard of broken space equipment that was still partially functional and quite dangerous, as Klaus had recently experienced. When the grayish-white hull of the station obscured all visible space and the familiar thud of the mooring clamps, accompanied by a distinctive shuddering sound, swept across the raider, a strange feeling came over Klaus. Several years of war, then another 3 decades of continuous travel across the entire human sector of the galaxy, plus occasional trips outside of it. He had long ago gotten used to considering himself a civilian, with a few adjustments maybe, used to calling Backwater his home. But this feeling would probably stay with him forever. Back at the war, he experienced it every time he returned to base from another combat sortie. More often than not, he was missing one of his comrades who had gone on the mission with him. Judging by the other ramps being empty, he was the first to arrive. Well, that was even for the better. It would give him time to check everything and prepare for any unforeseen circumstances, especially considering that here on Greatness, almost all circumstances are usually unforeseen. The transitional airlock, the empty armory, and the general gallery that led to the station's central rooms looked like they hadn't been used in years. Perhaps that was actually the case. Klaus himself had last traveled to the station. When had that been? That's right, 8 years ago. That's when he met here with... The floor beneath Klaus's feet shook slightly. It wasn't much. An ordinary civilian in his place probably wouldn't have even noticed it. But to Klaus, it was a sure signal. Another ship had arrived at the station. The comms were silent, however. As he left, he adjusted his Raiders communications node to broadcast all signals to the receiver of the combat suit. The person he planned to meet at the station would be sure to notify Klaus of their arrival. It was about a 5-minute walk to the station's central console. Klaus pulled a heavy emitter from his holster and lowered the armored face shield of his helmet. He would find out soon enough. At that moment, the station shook, sending him tumbling down the corridor, hitting the wall and rolling behind the curve of a long metal gut, and just in time. Several plasma discharges struck the wall where he just stood. Groaning, Klaus rose to his feet and sprinted away. He wasn't going to get into a firefight with an unknown enemy, at least not until he found some cover. At this marvelous thought, Klaus burst into the central post, which once controlled the entire life of the station. The basic functionality of the Greatness station, along with any remnants of the greatness as a virtue, of course, had long ago been lost. But some things still worked, as long as the 2 auxiliary small quark reactors were functioning. The berthing automatics, for example. The console, of course, had been remodeled for the Ullerian personnel, and Klaus, cursing desperately, tried to read the half-forgotten, vaguely familiar symbols over the instruments and control keys. His pursuers didn't seem to be following him yet. Apparently, they were not too attracted to the idea of running headlong into the very likely oncoming fire. They would soon realize that they could simply split up and enter the post from several sides at once. Damn it, where the hell is that bulkhead control terminal? Okay. This one looks like it's connected to the airlocks, the personnel quarters, and this one, that's the row to the right. You're looking at restrooms, storerooms, and other technical areas. Klaus turned around swiftly, raising his weapon. A tall figure of characteristic angular outlines, dressed in a light spacesuit and unarmed, stood literally 2 steps away from him. Klaus lowered the gun. Damn you, Dabzon! You can't sneak up on old people like that. Their nerves are weak. I almost put holes in you. Instead of answering, the Ullerian stepped past Klaus and pressed a few keys on the right row. 3 of the 5 doors leading to the central station slammed shut. I'm not too happy to see you either, the Ullerian said. But let's get as far away from here as possible without casualties before we continue to express our mutual dislike, shall we? Klaus only shook his head. For a Ullerian, Dabzon Shinbar had an incredible sense of humor, or rather, sarcasm. All that remains is to somehow make it to the ships, he said to the Ullerian. In case you haven't noticed, there's some very unfriendly company between the dock and us. Who are they, by the way? Warriors of the True Path, Dabzon said, not taking his eyes off the console. After pressing a few more keys, he straightened up. By the way, you don't have to worry about getting into your Raider. They blew it to shreds along with a good chunk of the dock. Blimey, Klaus said confusedly, addressing that expression to both pieces of news at once. The True Path is still alive? I thought they were all done. And how will we get out of here if our ships are vaporized? Well, as you can see, not all of them, Dabzon answered. And as for the ship, only yours was vaporized. Mine is hidden where it can't be found easily. Klaus thought there was a slight sneer in the alien's gaze mixed with sympathy, but who would really know those damn Ullerians? After all, I served on this station, and I know a thing or two about it, the Ullerian finished. So are we going? I've sealed off everything I can, but it won't keep them out long. I'd prefer to postpone the encounter with the true ones until we have numerical superiority on our side. Klaus shook his head. Yes. Let's move. I'm not planning to exchange greetings with these guys either. Especially since they have already paid their respects, he added, rubbing his bruised shoulder. As Dabzon's ship slipped out of the small dock at the other end of the station, Dabzon said it had been built during the war by the commander to accommodate personal couriers, and sped away toward the edge of the system. Klaus looked at the screen and asked hopefully, "Why don't we hit their ship with something? We can't just run away without leaving them a parting gift." Dabzon jerked his head, and his eye flaps moved down and up rapidly. To the Ullerian, this was the equivalent of a shrug. Unlike many followers of the new path, Dabzon didn't feel it necessary to try to mimic human facial expressions to make better contact. "You think I wouldn't do it if I could?" he said. "But they've got a multi-role assault ship, and I've only got a few small guided missiles on board with weak warheads. It's just a reinforced courier sloop. I took it for speed and stealth. Unlike some people, I can't afford to race around the galaxy in full-fledged warships." "Neither can I," Klaus said. "But the situation calls for it sometimes. Our friends, on the other hand, don't seem to care. I think they flew into the system or someplace nearby in another ship that wasn't so conspicuous. Then, they took that flying tank out of mothballs and went after me. Why after you? It's not clear from my message exactly who is supposed to arrive at the station if they intercepted it on the relay." "Because it's not about the message," Dabzon said. "I've been bugged." "Don't worry," he said to Klaus. "I've already found the bug and checked the whole ship. I thought I'd meet you, and we'd find out who was interested in me so suddenly. But I didn't expect them to be so quick." "Okay," Klaus said. "To hell with them. But maybe they're the ones who brought me here, though." Dabzon waited silently, looking like a stone statue of a Ullerian veteran. All Ullerian veterans looked like stone statues of themselves. "Tell me this," Klaus said, looking Dabzon straight in the eye. "Do you know anything about shipments of Ullerian-made field-grade heavy weapons from the war into Federation territory?" Dabzon was silent for a moment, then blinked. "I don't know," he said. "But I think I'm going to have to find out soon, because I flew to meet you with a counter-question. Do you know anything about the free colonies being supplied with frozen Ullerian embryos to raise as slaves?" Klaus was so dumbfounded that he was speechless for a full minute. "I'll be damned," he said at last. "What the hell is going on in this damn galaxy?" "No idea," Dabzon said. "But I guess we're going to have to find out." Klaus closed his eyes. "And I thought I'd have a chance to grow old in peace after all these years," he said.